All right, so we are going to get started here. I apologize in advance if there's any dinging on my end every time someone joins the call, and things on the side.
Mhm.
Um, so good morning, everyone. My name is Astrid Kwas. I'm the Director of Capital and Expense Budget at the Office of Brooklyn Borough President Antonio Reynoso.
Oh, Astrid, I believe you're muted.
Can y'all hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, okay, wonderful. Let me start again. So my name is Astrid Claus. I'm the Director of Capital and Expense Budget at the Office of Brooklyn Borough President Reynoso. I'm also joined here by my colleague, Sonaida Rodriguez, who's recently joined us as a budget associate, and of course, our IT guru, Jesus, who is here to save me in case I crash this meeting. But on behalf of our office, we'd like to thank you all for joining today's fiscal year 25 capital funding info session for nonprofits. In today's session, I'll be giving a presentation on providing just a general overview of our capital funding process and information on how to apply for funding from our office. Okay, here we go. I'm also joined today by our partnering agencies who will also be providing you with additional insight into the capital process, eligibility, and what happens after your organization has been awarded funding from our office. Our session's also going to include a Q&A portion at the end of all the presentations. So we ask that you kindly hold your questions until that time. Most of the questions that we did receive from the RSVP link will be covered throughout the presentations, but any new questions that you may have, we'll do our best to answer during the Q&A. We do also want to be respectful of everyone's time, so we will aim to end the session by the scheduled time of 12 p.m. I am happy to leave the meeting open for a short period after we conclude it in case you want to drop any unanswered questions into the chat. And we will be sending out an FAQ sheet to everyone that's in attendance after the session with responses to those questions. And lastly, this info session is being recorded, so do keep a smile on. And we will make the link available to everyone via our office's website. So no worries if you cannot capture all of the information that we present today. Oops, second. Okay, here we go. I'd like to first start with an overview of our capital program. As mandated by Section 211 and 249 of the New York City Charter, borough presidents are provided with an annual allocation of capital funding to appropriate to eligible projects at the borough president's discretion, of course. So generally eligible and funded projects are run by nonprofit organizations, other city agencies, and educational institutions. Most of these projects usually provide infrastructure improvements across our borough, such as housing developments, hospitals, parks, and so forth. As some, if not most of you, may already know, in his first year in office, Borough President Reynoso allocated his entire capital funding budget for fiscal year 23 to the 3 Brooklyn public hospitals to specifically support capital improvements to their maternity units. This decision, which is actually the first time that a borough president allocates all of their capital funding to just one cause, was made as part of his maternal health initiative to combat maternal mortality amongst birthing people of color. So Coney Island was allocated $18.5 million for an integrated women's health unit. Woodhull Hospital received $11 million for labor and birthing suite renovation. And lastly, Kings County received $15.6 million to support renovations to their mother, baby units and NICU unit. For fiscal year 24, capital funding was allocated in a more traditional way of awarding funding, which is across different projects that fall into all the categories displayed. And these categories shown were comprised of not just city-owned projects, but also not-for-profit organizations. So supporting Brooklyn nonprofits is a priority for the borough president. So we want to make sure that all of you have the necessary tools and information to access this funding. So some of the types of non-city projects that are generally supported by capital funding from our office include real property projects, which are managed by ETC. These projects include real property acquisition, such as land or buildings, the construction of new buildings, and renovations to existing buildings as well. There are also movable property projects, which are managed by DDC, that are supported through this funding. These include purchases of equipment and furniture that are either not attached to real property or just minimally attached. And it also includes the purchase of vehicles and initial outfitting of newly occupied or recently renovated spaces. Affordable housing projects, which are managed by HPD, can also receive capital funding. These projects are typically either new construction or improvements to housing facilities. And as you see, we'll discuss this in more detail later, but it's important to also note that housing projects must utilize an HPD housing loan program. And lastly, projects that are run by cultural organizations and are managed by DCLA. So when considering your fiscal year 25 capital project, it's important to understand the eligibility requirements in order to be best prepared. The first thing a group must establish is whether they are eligible as an organization to apply. The requirements that at a minimum must be met are: one, you must be a not-for-profit organized under New York State law or registered to do business in New York State. The organization must also have an operating history of at least 3 years, and the application for funding will require you to provide audited financial statements for these 3 preceding years. The organization must also have full-time paid staff. And lastly, you must also have a history of receiving operating funds from the City of New York. This can be in the form of any operating contract with any city agency. If you are requesting funding for a real property project, you must have current and the last 2 preceding fiscal years of at least $50,000 per year of operating contracts from the city. And if you are requesting funding for a movable property project, then it is just a current fiscal year contract of at least $25,000. For cultural organizations, which Darren will discuss in more detail later, you must have received CDF recommendation from DCLA and also be a member of the Cultural Institutions Group. It's also important to know that some of these requirements vary or may be waived if you're an applicant that is either a hospital or a health center applying for affordable housing, and of course, as I mentioned, if you are a cultural institution. So now let's move on to the project eligibility requirements. In general, all projects must be classified as a capital asset under GAAP and city rules. The project must also provide frontline services to the public, and these services can be rendered either via physical access or telephonic communication. For movable property projects, 3 things to note. For items that are not attached to real property, such as a vehicle, each item or equipment system must be a minimum of $50,000. There is an exception to this for initial outfitting projects. Second, items that have a minor degree of attachment, each item or equipment system must be a minimum of $250,000. And lastly, movable property projects can be funded in full with city capital dollars. For real property projects, they must be a minimum of $500,000. And unlike the movable property projects, these cannot be funded in full with city capital dollars, and rather the city contribution must follow the 90-50 rule, which is 90% of eligible costs up to $2 million and 50% of the remaining costs thereafter. The remainder of the cost has to be covered by the organization using other non-city sources, which can include any state grants, private donors, or the organization's own operating budget. And lastly, for any improvements to existing property, the organization must own the property or have a long-term lease with their landlord. So before we get into the application process for our office, I also wanted to highlight 2 important things to keep in mind. One, the eligibility requirements that we just discussed are not a comprehensive list of all the requirements. We do encourage you to review the complete guidelines for city capital funding, which are available on the New York City OMB Capital website. We'll also share the link with everyone after the session, and you'll also be able to find it on our office's website once we get it updated for the new application cycle. And secondly, capital funding is made available on a reimbursement basis. So any purchase that a group makes prior to receiving an award letter and having a funding agreement registered are made at the organization's own risk, and the city is under no obligation to reimburse you for those purchases. Sorry. So for fiscal year 25, what does the application process look like? So organizations should begin the capital process by developing a project scope. And developing the scope, you need to know what it is that you'll be asking the borough president to fund. Details of your request are going to be requested in our applications. So once a project scope is determined, the next step obviously is to establish the cost of the project so that it aligns with the amount of funding that you're requesting from our office. The CAP grants application will require you to submit quotes and estimates backing these costs. So please be sure to keep these handy. We also highly encourage all groups, especially those that are new to the capital application process, to reach out to our budget team. That way we can discuss the project with you and make sure that both your organization and the project are meeting the eligibility requirements. So all groups that are requesting funding from our office, for non-city groups, of course, must submit 2 applications. So one, the group must apply directly to our office via our BP Reynoso fiscal year 25 funding application, which is going to be made available on our website during the first week of January 2024. And then we'll also, of course, circulate the link to all attendees today once we have it available. Just a few pointers on the application. Very important that all questions are answered completely and correctly as requested on the application. Unfortunately, we had groups in the prior year that were deemed ineligible because of incomplete applications. The application also is going to ask you for organization information, contact information, cost of your project, the amount of funding you're requesting from our office, and of course, details on your intended project. In addition to our office's application, you must also submit a CAP grants application via the OMB CAP grants portal. Dave, who's with us today, will be giving you all a run through of the site shortly. Application documents are going to be made available for downloading before the end of this calendar year. And then the portal will open in January for groups to begin uploading their application documents. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to make sure that both applications are submitted. Again, last year we had groups that missed being considered for funding solely because they were missing one or the other application. Once a capital application is submitted, either Zenaida or myself will reach out with any questions that we might have. Should there be any specific questions that arise related to your CAP grants application, you'll receive notifications either requesting additional information or requesting revision of documents via the portal. Will re-grant you access to be able to log in and respond to those inquiries or update the documents. So over the course of a few weeks, the borough president reviews applications, selects projects for funding. Some organizations have already asked if the borough president has any funding priorities for this fiscal year, and the answer to that is he does not have a particular area of focus for this year. So similar to last year, he'll be looking to spread funding across all of Brooklyn. So lastly, after the adoption of the fiscal year 25 New York City budget, award letters are going to be emailed to all the organizations that are receiving funding from our office sometime between July and early August. And within 6 months, the managing agencies will reach out to other groups and begin the project planning process and registration of a funding agreement. So lastly, as I previously mentioned, our application will be made available on our website, brooklynbp.nyc.gov on January 2nd, 2024. The deadline to submit both our office's application and CAP grants is February 22nd, 2024 by close of business. I'd like to emphasize that this is a hard deadline and groups should aim to submit their applications a few days prior to allow for any troubleshooting should any issues arise. For groups that are requesting funding from both the borough president and your local council member, you must have applied to both offices by this February 22nd date. And if you miss the deadline for our office, but would still like to apply for funding from council only, then the deadline to apply with their offices will be March 21st, 2024. And just a quick note, if there are any charter schools on this call that are interested in capital funding for non-technology projects, these rules also apply to these schools. You must also submit a CAP grants application in addition to the BP application. And again, any questions, please reach out to the budget team. My email and Sanaida's email address are listed here. And of course, you can always reach out to us in our general budget department inbox. So I'll now like to turn the meeting over to Dave at OMB, who will give you a look inside the CAP Grants portal.
Thanks very much, Astrid. Hopefully you can hear me. My name is Dave LaChance. I'm a deputy counsel at OMB, the New York City Office of Management and Budget. Joining me today from my team is Zalon Charles, who is also an attorney here at OMB. Astrid, I think, did a very good job of explaining the basics, the eligibility requirements for the CAP grants, non-city funding rules. I'm here to talk a bit about the actual website, how you will go in, find the application documents, upload those documents. But I will stick around after to answer any questions about eligibility, general questions, if anyone has those. So there will be an opportunity for that later on. I also want to take the opportunity to thank all of our other city partners who are here on the call today, DDC, EDC, DCLA, HPD. I think it's really great to have everyone here to explain every step of the process because it is a little bit complicated, but I do think it's helpful for potential applicants or people who have applied in the past and received funding to get the full picture of the process. So without any further ado, I am going to share my screen here, and Astrid, just let me know if you're able to see this and it's not too small, anything along those lines.
All good here.
Okay. So what I'm showing you right here is what we refer to as the CAP Grants city website or the CAP Grants download site sometimes. You can see it says NYC CAP Grants. You can find this page by simply Googling New York City CAP Grants, NYC CAP Grants, anything like that will bring you to this page. This is where you can access all the information you need to get started submitting your CAP Grants application. You'll notice that this is still set up for the fiscal year 2024 CAP Grants and notes that info about FY25 will be available in late December. Fortunately, we are almost in late December, and this will be updated sometime next week. That is our goal. So please check back later on this month to get additional information. Once we do update the site, you will be able to find a few things on this main homepage. First of all, you will see all the deadlines for submitting applications that Astrid had in her presentation. But just to recap for everybody, because these are very important deadlines, any applications to the borough president must be in by February 22nd at 5 p.m. Any applications to the borough president and the council must also be in February 22nd by 5 p.m. So if you want to request funds from two different elected officials or from multiple council members and the BP, still has to be in by late February. If you're just applying to the council, you can submit those applications by March 21st by 5 p.m. So you have about a month of additional time. When we update this download site, we will also put the CAP Grants application materials in a downloadable link for you right on this homepage here. The application materials is a zip folder of 33 documents. It includes, which I actually have here, it includes, this is really small, I apologize, a number of actual application documents. So these are fillable PDFs that I'll show you in a second that you will need to complete depending on what type of project you're applying for. You will fill in those actual documents. It also has a number of somebody, just make sure you're on mute. It also includes very helpful documents like the CAP Grants guidelines, which lay out all the rules that Astrid mentioned before, along with some others, the bullet points to the guidelines, which is a really succinct version of those guidelines, a good helpful cheat sheet as you're getting started, and a whole bunch of example documents or other important information. So critical step, as soon as this becomes available, please go on, download it, and look through everything very, very carefully before you start filling anything out or submitting any project applications. All right, so Also on our Cap Grants main webpage, we have a bunch of other helpful stuff. We have a how-to video here where you can follow along and see everything I'm going to show you today and more, exactly how to upload everything and make changes to your documents when those are required. We also have Cap Grants instructions that you can download here from the instructions tab, which is just basically a PDF version of the same instructions, how to do everything. You can download the guidelines that we just spoke about, which will also be in the download zip file. And you can also access the bullet points to the guidelines here. Uh, Lastly, you can access the Cap Grants portal, where you will eventually go to upload your documents. Again, this is not quite open for fiscal year 25, but when it is, it will be accessible here, and you will be able to find the link to the portal. That as mentioned, the application will become available next week. The portal will probably open the first week of January. We have to make sure that everything is working correctly before it goes live, but our target date is the first week of January. That means you will have about a month and a half between the date the portal goes live and applications to the BP are due. You'll have even longer between the date that the application materials are downloadable and the date the application is due. So you have plenty of lead time to get everything together and upload it. Um, I'm going to just very quickly show you what some of these fillable PDF application forms look like. And just a brief note, these are the forms that are relevant and necessary for non-city, not-for-profit organizations that are not cultural. So if you are a cultural organization submitting a cultural application, I believe Darren on the line will talk a little bit more about that later, but this application is only relevant for non-cultural organizations. Charter schools that are applying for non-technology projects, as Astrid mentioned, should also fill out these same forms. And housing organizations applying for housing projects through HPD should also fill out these forms. There is a specific HPD application, and HPD is the agency that will review those applications, but it is still in our downloadable packet. So this is an example of what we call the organization form. This is the document that every organization needs to fill out to kind of establish the basics of your organization or group. If you are an organization submitting applications for funding this year, you only need to submit one version of the organization form. You only need to submit this once, but you may submit multiple project applications. So just keep that in mind if you have multiple projects you'd like funding for. This is a fillable PDF form. You can just type in whatever you want and save the PDF from here. I'll also just note that as you follow along with this form, you will be prompted to provide uh, additional documents. An example is here as we go on to page 4 and question 1. Based on your response here, you may be prompted to upload a separate document called attachment 0.1 or 0.1 organization background. So just please be careful as you are filling out this form that you identify all of the documents that need to be uploaded, and I will show you how to upload those things later on. Some of the forms that are requested here are forms that are provided in the downloaded zip file application packet. Some of them are your own documents that you're going to have to go and locate. Some of them would just be Word documents or PDFs of text that you would fill in or pictures, something like that. So all the instructions really are in here in the organization form for your organization materials. It should be clear as you go through the documents to identify what you need. If you have specific questions on that, of course, Astrid and her team are available to help answer those. Once you complete the organization form, you will also have to complete a project application, and you will need to complete one project application for every distinct individual project you want to submit an application for this year or you want funding for. So it's not, you don't submit one application for multiple projects. There are a number of different project types, and as you are filling out the application form, please be sure to fill out the correct project type application. This example here is the construction renovation application, but there's also one for a vehicle purchase or the acquisition of real property or the initial outfitting of a new space, something like that. The process is exactly the same. You will fill out the fillable PDF here and be prompted to upload certain documents or gather certain documents as you follow through the document. So My advice to all of you is to start this process as early as possible. As soon as you can download the materials, start filling out the applications, and start gathering the relevant documents. The site does not need to be open for you to complete everything required. The site itself is just where you upload the documents and provide a little bit of background information. But the very much the meat of the applications is in the forums themselves and in the documents that you will need to gather to submit this application. So please start that as early as possible. And again, if you have specific questions about filling them out or eligibility or what have you, you can talk to your elected officials, staff about that. Okay. Uh, All right. I'm now going to show you what the actual CAP Grants portal looks like. Again, you can access that from the CAP Grants site by going to the portal tab. This will be open sometime in early January. And when you do access that, you will be prompted to log in. I've already done that here. But if you logged in last year, some of you may remember that we created a new website for fiscal year 24. Which was fairly successful, I think. Some technical hiccups throughout the year, but we did make it work. So we will still use that site this year. If you applied last year or created an account last year, your account is still in the system for you as an individual, meaning when you try to go and log in, you can use your same login credentials. If you've forgotten your password, you can request a password reset right on that page, and it should send you an auto email to allow you to do that. If this is new to you, if you did not submit an application last year, you will need to create a new username for yourself. I mean, it's pretty simple, just using your email and creating a password. So mostly I'm saying this to note that if you applied in a year that was not last year, your your user information would not have been ported over to the new site. So anybody who applied last year can just log in with their credentials, but if you applied in previous years, you'll need to create a new username, which is again just your email. Pretty straightforward. Once you do create a username and you do log in, you will be taken to this main page, this home page here, with again some helpful information. These deadlines will of course be updated with the actual dates. These are just fake dates on our testing site. There will be some helpful information here and links on the side, basically taking you back to the main CAP Grants page, but always helpful to see things like the guidelines and the how-to videos on how to do everything. Okay, so when you first log in as a user, you'll note that there are a few tabs across the top. There's the organizations tab and the projects tab. Sort of as we mentioned when looking at the documents themselves, you'll need to submit organization materials and then submit project materials. They are separate. It's kind of two separate processes, mostly because one organization can submit multiple projects. I'm just going to click on the organization tab here. You can see I've created some test orgs. Most users are only going to register one organization or have access to one organization. Maybe there's a few of you out there who may be doing this on behalf of some orgs and may have more than one, but for the most part, it's really just going to be one. It is important to note that unlike on the old site, a single organization can only be registered one time on the CAP Grant site. And we challenge that by requesting your org's EIN number, employer identification number here. And if one was to enter an EIN number that was already used, meaning if something like Brookdale Hospital had already submitted an org form, they had already created sort of their organization in the system for FY25, you would get an auto alert that, you know what, Brookdale Hospital is already in the system. And if you were trying to create this org yourself, but realize it had already been created, you would get a pop-up saying, this organization already exists. Do you want to be added to that organization? And then the person who created the organization would receive an alert indicating that someone had asked to be added. So I think that's a helpful step, both to make sure that multiple people aren't trying to submit the same things and confusing the system, but also so that everybody who works for an organization can see the same documents in the same organization. Um, so I think that's fairly helpful. In here, you will just add the name of your organization. So this is just going to be a test, Y25 new test, and your EIN number. Hopefully I haven't used this one before. Well, do something like this. And then you will select your organization type. So here, the only distinctions are whether you are cultural or non-cultural. So if you have questions about that, go to DCLA. They can answer for you whether you can apply as a cultural. If not, you will be a non-cultural. And you will just this information here. Okay, so once you begin entering your organization information on here, there's a number of fields that we ask you to fill out. These things are not technically required by the site, but it would be helpful for you to provide as much contact information as possible. This helps the city's managing agencies who actually work with you on the projects down the line, so they know who to contact, or the elected officials, they know who to contact. My organization is not real, so I will not fill this in. Um, and on the next page, you are prompted to upload all of your organization documents. So you'll note that there's two columns here. There's the required documents. These documents are required of everyone submitting an org form. There are the supplemental documents. These are the documents that are only required the if you're prompted to provide those as you fill out the org form. So it's not if you don't upload all of the required documents, it will not let you submit the application. You may be required to fill out to submit supplemental documents. If you don't, there's no way for the system to know you were supposed to, but you will be prompted down the line to provide those. Um, this is, uploading the documents is pretty straightforward. I would recommend you have everything you plan to upload sort of in one location on your computer or a drive somewhere so you know how to upload those. You can upload documents in pretty much any format that's like a normally accepted format by websites. So PDFs, Word documents, Excel sheets, all that stuff works in here. Even JPEG pictures work. So if you just click on the choose file, it will, you can toggle wherever you want and you can upload a document and it will show eventually that document is uploaded. You can also open to see whatever you uploaded here and it will download for you. So you can just make sure you uploaded the correct thing. And if not, choose something else. Once I'm not going to do it now, but if I did upload everything, I could scroll down to the bottom and hit the submit organization button. And once you do that, if you go back to your organization page, you will see that your org, rather than showing draft status here, shows complete status like this. I'll also just note that you don't have to do everything all at once. You can go in, you can save, you can, log out, come back in over time. So don't feel like you have to go in and complete your entire organization upload all at once. It just won't let you actually submit until you've uploaded everything. I will note that once you do submit, if it accepts it, you can't go and make changes unless somebody gives you access to go in and make changes to your organization. So if you realize you've made an error or something, you could reach out to Astrid's team and they would be able to help you, but otherwise it's going to be locked. Once you do submit your organization, you'll receive an automated email saying, great, we've received your org. Now you need to submit a project because, of course, if you've only submitted the organization materials, we have no idea what project you want funded. So that's only half the process. Hopefully that's clear, but every year somebody forgets to do the project type. So please be careful. I did just see something come in the chat and I will address this. Somebody's asking, can you delete a form once it's been uploaded? Before you submit your organization, and it's the same for the projects, you could just upload a new document over that document. It will not really record that the first document was uploaded. But once it's submitted, there's no way to change or upload a new document unless you're given permission by the elected officials to do that. So again, if you realize before the deadline that you've made a mistake, reach out to Astrid's team. Hopefully that was helpful. All right, once you've completed your org, again, you'll need to go in and create a new, what we say here is create a new capital request or submit a new project request. You can see I've created a few examples here, but I'm going to do another one very quickly to show you what it looks like. So first you'll be prompted to select the organization which is submitting this application. For most of you, you're only going to have one organization, so you can just select whatever that is. This was my org I created for testing purposes. And this process looks very similar to the organization. Well, I guess first we're going to select our application category. So here, my FY25 CAP grants test is a non-cultural organization, but here I'm also going to narrow down the category a little bit more. So you may be a housing organization applying for housing. You would select housing application here. Might be a charter school, or you might be anything else. So that's called all other in our system. Let's say you're in all other, then you will select your project type. So this is where you kind of narrow down the actual type of project you're applying for. Could be a construction project, movable property equipment, initial outfitting, real property acquisition, or a vehicle. So let's say we're doing a vehicle project, just for example. And now we're taken to a page that looks very similar to what we saw for the upload page for the org section, but there's a few more fields you'll need to fill in here. You'll have to give your project a title. So make this something that's relatively descriptive, explains what the project is. That's just helpful for us and for the elected officials. You will add your total city funding request amount here. As Astrid mentioned, the minimum for movable equipment is 50,000, but of course it could be something more than that. You'll give a basic description of the project. There's a character limit here, so just sort of write, something that's helpful here to describe what the project is. You'll have to add your project location. And here it just kind of prompts you to add an address. And this is where you actually identify the elected officials from whom you are requesting funding. So if you want to request funds from the borough president, you'll select him from here and then add the amount you want to request from him. Let's say we wanted half of it from the BP. You would add that, and it will then add over on the side. And we could also indicate that we wanted some funding from council. So as you can see here, it says total council funding request. Rather than assigning a specific dollar amount to a specific council member, you just say the total amount you want from the council, and they sort of work it out on their end, who can give what to what projects. So we would just say total council funding request is this. We would add that amount here. And then below, you can see it says council members. Please select the council members or delegations you would like to see this request. You can select as many as you want from here. So maybe we want the Brooklyn delegation, maybe we want, district whatever, can add those all in here. I will note the only elected officials who can see your application are the ones that you identify here. So if you would like the Brooklyn Borough President to see your application, you'll need to add him in this list. If you do not, his staff will not even see your application when they go into the site for themselves. So please be sure to include any of those elected officials. There is a way to go in and add additionals later on, or you could be prompted to do so. So if there is an error, that could be fixed. But just want to make it clear that if you don't select somebody on here, they will not see your application and will not know anything about it. Just like the org section, you would upload any relevant documents here. There's the required documents, which is required for everybody submitting a vehicle application. And then there's supplemental documents that may be required for you depending on how you fill things out. So once you are ready with this, you would hit submit project. It's not going to let me do it because I haven't filled everything in. I see a question here, which I will answer. This says, do projects need to be separate? The answer to that is yes. Each individual project you are requesting should be a separate application, and you can submit as many applications as you would like. Maybe I misunderstood the question for council in different boroughs. So you can request funding from different elected officials for the same project, and you should only submit one application for that project. Applications are project specific, not elected official specific. So if you want funding for this project from, as we have up here, the BP and the council, just identify them in your project application. That said, if you want money for a vehicle and then you want money for an equipment system, and then you want to ask for money for a building renovation, those are going to be separate applications, and you can and should upload 3 separate applications. Hopefully that's helpful. All right. Last thing I'm going to show you on here, once you've submitted your application, the elected official staff will review those applications to identify ones they're interested in and to determine whether those projects are eligible. Zalan and I and the others on our team at OMB review these non-cultural, non-housing projects also for eligibility purposes, and we determine which projects are eligible and which ones are not. But often there are questions that we all need to answer to determine whether a project is eligible or not. And it's not unusual, and it's not really even a reflection on your organization or your ability to fill out these applications. If you do get questions, it's just really part of the process. This is complicated, and the capital rules are tricky. So please expect to get questions if it's a project that the BP is interested in funding. That's a very normal part of the process. After the application deadline, when OMB starts reviewing these applications, we will note any questions or issues we might see with the application that can be addressed by your team, and we will send those questions on to the elected officials. So Astrid and her team would be able to send those questions on to you through the Cap Grants portal. They would submit what we call a change request to you, and you would receive an automated email telling you that there is a change request. Once that is received, if you log back in, you will see there is this messages section that pops up near your project. So this is one that does not have any messages. This one I did submit a change request for, so you can see the messages here. If you click on this, it will show you the actual requests that have been made. It will tell you which document is relevant here, tell you what to change about them. Sometimes these might be, pretty long, lengthy, have a whole bunch of things to change. These are just examples. And it will give you a deadline to submit those changes by. Very critical that you respond to these things as quickly as possible, and that you try to hit the deadlines that are provided by the elected official staff, because there's a lot of projects to review, and the quicker you get things in, the quicker we can look at them. Once you kind of identify what the issues are, make the changes in the documents. If you go into your project, you will actually see you are prompted to upload those new documents here. So these were the two that were identified in the messages. We asked you to make a change to the construction renovation. We also asked you to upload this lien holder letter, which was not requested initially, or not part of the required documents at first. And once you upload those, you can submit again, and the project will go back to the elected officials. So that's really the process. If you have any, troubleshooting as you are submitting applications, as your applications are submitted and you field change requests, don't hesitate to reach out to your elected official staff. We at OMB work very closely with them. Everybody else in the process works very closely with them, and they are the best place to go for initial triage. If there's real technical issues, we do have IT staff that can try to help with things, but for the most part, your question should go to the elected official staff. So that's what I have. Again, Zalan and I are going to hang around at the end if there are questions about this site, questions about eligibility for non-cultural, non-housing projects, or just anything about cap grants in general.
Thank you, Dave. Yes, we do want to just ask that you please hold your questions till the end, and then we can address them at that time. So I'd like to welcome now Mason from EDC, who's going to talk to us a little bit more about the real property projects.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're well. Happy holidays. I hope that you can hear me. I'm going to start this brief presentation. Can everyone see my screen?
Yep, we're good here.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to run through this at a very high level to Dave's point, and thank you for that wonderful presentation, Dave, and also Astrid, you gave a great summary of like the biggies, I would say, of the process and the capital funds and the requirements that come with them. But once basically you apply through Cap Grants or the Capital Grants portal, and you apply to your elected officials, be they borough president or city council, or you apply to DCLA, and the application is reviewed, approved, allocated, and awarded funding, $500,000 plus renovation and property acquisition or new construction projects come to NYC EDC, the New York City Economic Development Corporation. And we manage that process via something called a funding agreement. And this is a very technical definition, but essentially a funding agreement is a contractual mechanism to transfer city funds to a nonprofit to create or improve a capital asset that serves a public purpose. I'm just going to break that down and digest that for a moment. So the funding agreement is essentially a contract. It's a template contract. And the purpose is to transfer these city capital funds to a nonprofit in order to do a capital project. And again, for our purposes at EDC, when we manage these projects, they are a new construction, a new building, a renovation project, or a renovation project of an existing building, that is, or a property acquisition project, so you can purchase a property. The most important thing here, though, is it has to serve a public purpose. We will vet that, OMB vets that, the elected officials vet that, but that's going to be a central theme of your project. In this presentation, which is a watered-down version of what I typically give, we have a lot more project photos, but I just wanted to highlight these to show you that it can happen. It's possible. These projects get built every day, and even though it is a technical and lengthy process at times, you have plenty of people here at various city agencies and entities who are more than capable and more than happy to help you through the process. And before I go on, I just realized I didn't introduce myself. My name is Mason Hess. I'm a vice president in the Funding Agreements Department at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, or NYC EDC. And I've been managing funding agreement projects for about 5.5 years now, and I've been at EDC for almost 8 years. Now, I'm not going to go into tons of detail here, but at a high level, this is the process that Dave just went over. So all of the funding agreement process starts, and all funding agreement projects starts with the capital grants application. The portal is typically opened, as discussed already, in December or January. Applications are due in February and or March. And EDC funding agreements excuse me, our EDC does not make any funding decisions. We are not part of the application process. We also do not assist with applications. So every now and then we do get questions from groups, and we're happy to sort of redirect you in the right direction. But again, we're not part of the application process. We don't assist with applications. We don't review applications. We don't award applications. That would be the Department of Cultural Affairs, DCLA, or Office of Management and Budget, OMB, or your elected officials office, the borough president, or your city council member. So where our process really begins is after you've been awarded funds. Again, importantly, your funds are allocated as of the start of the new fiscal year on July 1. And the important flag there is no costs that you expect to be reimbursed through this process can be incurred before July 1. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind. Just, as of July 1, your money for reimbursement purposes is quote unquote available, but it's not available for actual reimbursement yet. And that's because we have to go through the FA process. But that July 1 date is really important, so please keep that in mind. And also please keep in mind, as mentioned before, by both presenters, that this program operates on a reimbursement basis, meaning that you as an organization have to incur the cost first, submit documentation, and then be reimbursed. And so please keep that in mind for obviously the budget implications, the cash flow implications that has. So once the DCLA and OMB teams refer projects to the managing agencies, renovation and new construction and acquisition projects come here to EDC. And our process essentially has 8 steps, just so you can kind of keep a mental map. And I also want to keep a mental map of sort of a hill or a mountain. And so we start our ascent with intake. We at EDC, your project manager or your PM, will basically send you a bunch of templates. So we'll send you a list of documents needed. We collect those documents and vet them during the intake process. And that's to prepare basically the city review and approvals packages. Once we have all these project documents, and I will go through a list of them at the end of this presentation, we then refer all of the project's documents to city law for legal drafting. It's important to note here that you will have to have legal counsel, outside legal counsel, to help you through this process, not just for the FA process, but when doing a capital construction project, it's important to have attorneys just for, a safety net, but also you're going to have several other contracts involved in the process, such as with your construction contractor, be they a general contractor or a construction manager. Once all parties, your attorneys, EDC, and city law agree to a legal draft, we refer the project to the Office of Management and Budget, to Dave and the various task force for review. If you are a non-cultural project, you will do a pre-CP or a pre-certificate to proceed review. And if you are a non-cultural group, you'll then have a second CP review, which is just more formal. And they do slightly different things at those points. And but again, if you're a non-cultural project, you have a pre-CP and a CP review. If you are a cultural project, you will only do a CP review. And the important flag here is that a certificate to proceed takes your awarded allocation and turns it into an authorized allocation, meaning that the city, city law, OMB, and us as project managers at EDC have reviewed the scope and the legal documents, and we have deemed that the project meets city capital eligibility and requirement rules. Some flags here is at intake. Before we start this process, I really need the organizations to know that we're worried about full funding. So to Ashford's point, not all capital projects can be fully funded by the city. We need to know where the remaining funds are coming from. We're going to look at capital eligibility, both at EDC and city law and OMB, making sure that all of the things you want us to reimburse are eligible. You need to think about an environmental review. You need to remember to pay prevailing wages on the entire project, not just the city funding scope. So that has budget implications. There has to be prevailing wages paid on the entire scope, not just the funding agreement or city funded scope. If you have a larger project, you'll have to consider MWBE goals, but which is minority, women, and disadvantaged business enterprises. If you don't know what that is, we can talk about that more later. Again, I already mentioned here, outside legal counsel is needed. And of course, if you need to start your project before all of your city approvals are in place, then that's sort of going at risk. It's not sort of, it is going at risk. And that's important because that means that at some point in the process where various city entities and stakeholders are reviewing your project, there could be something that you plan for us to reimburse that's deemed ineligible, for example, and we won't be able to. And that means that might mess up sort of your plans of how you were going to pay for the project. And so there is a real element of going at risk before you have all your city approvals. 3 of those approvals are here: EDC intake approval, city law legal draft approval, and OMB certificate to proceed approval. After these steps, we go to some other pieces that will bring us to where that risk element is gone. So once we have a CP from OMB, EDC will collect all of the contract documents needed to actually execute the contract. And that's called execution. It's an EDC process. We essentially are taking the funding agreement contract and executing it, and it becomes binding. And there's some documents we collect as part of that process that we need to execute your contract. And they're very clearly spelled out and stipulated in the contract itself. And your EDC project manager will be more than happy to guide you through this, help you through this, collect these, vet these, send you feedback, etc. After we execute the contract, we then have to go to our other city stakeholder in the process, outside of city law and outside of OMB, and that is the comptroller. And we have to register this contract, just as you would a city operating contract. And after registration, that is the magic moment where your funds are actually available for payment reimbursements. Okay, and then at that point, that's whenever the risk element is gone. So think about the mountain analogy. Intake, we start our hike up the mountain. Legal drafting, we're getting closer. OMB is sort of like the hardest push toward the top. And once we get the CP, that's a really big milestone. And we sort of start going downhill with execution and then registration, and then we get to payments. Some flags here are you do have to competitively procure your construction contractor that's going to be leading the work. This does not apply to subcontractors, but your prime or first tier contractor has to be competitively procured, meaning you can't just hire a firm you're familiar with or a family friend firm. You have to actually make an advertisement, try to get a good faith effort to get 5 bids or solicitations or responses, and then rank the bids and select someone based on those criteria. Again, a competitive procurement is very important. You will have to submit certain forms as part of the execution and registration process. These include employment reports. You will also have to obtain payment and performance bonds from your contractors and maybe potentially even your subcontractors, depending their contract value. You will have to have insurance from your contractor and from you as an organization. You will have to do a responsibility determination to confirm that you're in good standing with the city in terms of taxes. You also have to be enrolled in Passport. This is you as an organization, a nonprofit organization, and a funding recipient via the capital grants process, but you will also have to have your contractor enrolled in Passport, and then you have to have title insurance. So I know this is a lot, but I just want to, I want you to remember, again, our process is intake, legal drafting, the OMB-CP review, execution, and the registration, and then we enter into payments. And some big flags here are a competitive procurement of your contractor, payment performance bonds, insurance, Passport, and a title policy. Okay. And again, it sounds like a lot, but we literally do this every day we have over 200 projects with we've worked with literally hundreds of groups over the years. We manage literally over $1 billion in city capital, really at some points. And so we're very well versed here. And then coming to the end, this is the very end of our process. You do have to, I mentioned requisitions, which is the payment phase. Before we begin payments, we'll do something called sort of contract effectiveness. And that's really just the vet to make sure that we have everything we need, that all documents are current, that all documents are approved, that all documents are collected. And then after contract effectiveness, which is done with your EDC project manager, we go into payments. You have to submit proof that the work is done. Again, you have to incur the cost first, and then we will reimburse you. And then there's a closeout for the contract. That requires certain special construction documents and industry standard documents. Again, these are all requirements. All the requirements I've gone over are very clearly stipulated in the FA contract itself, in the funding agreement. Our project managers are very well versed in these processes, and our job is literally to guide you and help you through it so that way we can implement your project. Some flags here is, again, that title insurance policy. It was sort of draft before, now it's final before we begin payments, but the title insurance is really important. As the project goes on, your budget will change, and so we'll have to make sure that the budget is reconciled and is up to date on a regular basis, so that way we can see if there's any triggers. One big trigger, for example, is we always need to be sure that the capital grants application that was vetted and approved and started this whole journey is being done. So if you ever deviate too significantly from your capital grants application, its scope and its budget, et cetera, that's a potential concern. And we just want to make sure that we're doing what you said you would do in cap grant. So the capital grants process that Dave highlighted is really, really important. That application is really, really important. It stays with the project throughout its life cycle. Other things to keep in mind is we need to have your building certificate of occupancy. So consider that. Some groups, don't really check those things. Sometimes they're not compliant or they're out of date or they need to be updated. You need to do that as part of this process, this construction capital project process. You will have to submit in the requisition package things like lien waivers, which is essentially like just a confirmation from your vendors on the construction project that they're getting paid and that they're happy with you. You will also need things like proof of payments. We'll need the vendor invoices. Excuse me. And then the big things here, the last two things to bring us home, there is, again, the need for the outside counsel because you will have to submit as part of the contract effectiveness phase before payments an opinion of counsel, which is essentially a legal opinion that the project is in compliance and can move forward. And then if you are on private property as opposed to public or city-owned property, you will have to record a declaration of restrictive covenant. It is a use lien. It is not a financial lien. And it basically puts the city in first priority on the project property for the useful life of the asset. And the useful life of the asset can vary. It has to be a minimum of 5 years for city capital rules and capital eligibility requirements. But it can extend, 10, 15, 20, 30, or even more in terms of years because and that would depend on the type of work that's being done. But the declaration of restrictive covenant is sort of the other big legal piece outside of the funding agreement contract itself, and it is recorded on the property and it's put in first priority lien for a while. It could at minimum 5 years, and it may last longer. And so you need to talk with that as an organization, be okay and aware of what that means, and you also need to vet that with your legal counsel. To finish, here's the checklist of the documents that we need to kick off the FA process. Your project manager will send you this list and the templates at the FA intake process to start our journey together to implement your project. We basically need a narrative of the scope. We need a pretty detailed budget of what the cost will be in the project. And that should relate to the qualitative or sort of narrative version of the scope. The numerical version is essentially in the budget. So we need breakouts of HVAC, plumbing, electrical, general conditions, design, etc. We need to know what we're paying for, and it needs to be for the overall project, not just what the city's paying for. We'll do an initial site visit to meet your team and for your team to meet us, but we also want to see the actual project property because that helps us give us insight into what we're working on. We need, as mentioned before, proof of full funding. So we need to make sure that the project is fully funded outside of the city allocation. We need useful life certificates, both from you as the funding recipient organization and from an architect or engineer. Just that's to establish the useful life of the asset, which is important because of the declaration of restrictive covenant. And again, we also have to vet that it's a minimum of 5 years to be compliant with city capital rules. As mentioned, also, we need your city operating contracts. We will need a title report just to show that the property has no issues like liens, lawsuits, DOT or DEP violations, or DOB violations, that the taxes are paid, etc. But we do need a title report. If your project involves 2 million or more in funding, we will have to make sure that the green building standards laws take into consideration as you build and renovate your property or acquire your property. Any lease, if applicable, again, you can have a long-term lease in this process. And so if there is a lease, as opposed to you owning your property or being on city-owned property, we will need a lease. An environmental review. Anytime you do work in the city, you do need to do an environmental review. Sometimes it's not necessary, but you need documentation from the city saying that it's not necessary. So that's something to keep in mind, and you can work with your design team and your contractors. I mentioned the MWBE plan. You should always try to do it. It's good to hire MWBE firms, but if you have more than $3 million involved in your project, you will have to do an MWBE plan. It's required. And then, of course, depending on the nuances of the project, we may need other documents. Now, this is for a new construction renovation project. The last slide here is for a property acquisition. And you'll notice we have all the same things: a narrative, a budget, a site visit, proof of full funding, the useful life certificate, the city operating contracts, title report, environmental review, MWBE plan. But the differences are highlighted here in blue. We will need an appraisal for the property, the contract of sale, and we will definitely need to vet the certificate of occupancy. And so, that's a high-level view of our process. Thank you, everyone. Here's our email: fundingagreement@edc.nyc. Funding and agreement are capitalized, so funding agreement at edc.nyc. And you can also just Google NYC EDC funding agreements, and it'll bring you to our webpage. But here's the actual link. So yes, thank you all, and I'll also stay on until the end for any questions.
Thank you, Mason. Sorry, everyone. The MTA has taken over our block. Sorry for the background noise. So now I'd like to welcome Joshua from EDC, who gives a deeper dive into movable property projects.
All right. Hello, I'm Joshua Lambe. I am the Deputy Director of the DDC's Nonprofit Reimbursement Program. And I'm going to share my screen right now so I can show you just a quick overview of the type of awards we handle. Let me go to view full screen mode. All right. So the DDC Nonprofit Reimbursement Program handles 3 types of awards: equipment systems, vehicles, and initial outfitting. As Asher mentioned in the beginning, any services provided by these purchases must provide direct services to the people of New York City. And just to give you an idea what types of purchases are covered for equipment systems, they have like IT networks are one of the most common systems that we reimburse for, and also medical devices, which could consist of CT scanners, mammography units, MRIs, and many more. And vehicles, passenger vehicles, like for clinics or for centers that cater to the elderly, food distribution vehicles, and ambulances and maintenance vehicles. Just to reiterate, minimum award amount is $250,000, no matter what type of award it is. And if the item contains minimally attached equipment, which we could think of minimally attached as something that's screwed, bolted, or nailed to a wall, floor, or ceiling, that requires $250,000 worth of eligible items collectively. So the item itself doesn't necessarily have to be $250,000, unless, of course, it's a single item for the award. But as long as the overall collective dollar amount of eligible items is at least $250,000, minimally attached items are eligible. A couple other general things that we want to point out. This applies to all awards. So I'm gonna cover in general information for all awards, and also information that applies to each specific type of award. When it comes to what it is that you plan on buying, it should be consistent with what you entered in your cap grants application, which is the movable property list. Now, from the time that you submit the application versus the time that we notify you of the capital award, so once we give you the notification of the capital award, there are documentation that you'll provide, and which I'll mention that in a bit. But the main thing is that do the best you can to, when you're acquiring quotations, or if you're making purchases, depending on the type of award, that what you're buying should be consistent with what was listed in your movable property list. Now, as time passes, there's possibilities that availability and prices might change, especially when it comes to IT awards. We understand that, but it should be consistent. If it's something that's completely different, that could impact the overall eligibility of the award. Another thing to keep in mind, and this is a major issue, that unfortunately we actually came across this recently. I'm not going to say with who. When you go out and buy whatever vehicle or equipment, you cannot purchase an item prior to the fiscal year of your award. So, for example, if you're applying for capital funding for fiscal year 25, the city's fiscal year 25 begins July 1st, 2024. You cannot make any purchases, and costs incur when the order is placed. You cannot place an order for an item prior to that date. Even if the item is delivered afterwards, you cannot place the order prior to July 1st, 2024 for an FY25 award. Not all items are eligible for reimbursement. Our unit does vet through the list of items. So for certain types of purchases, especially this is the case for vehicles or medical devices, we need to see full specs, because we need to flag specific types of features that are often deemed as ineligible, such as maintenance, backup items, spare parts, consumables, portable devices, training, and software subscription. A lot of these items, and it's also a lot of it ties into useful life. Some of these items don't last because they're consumables, or items that are backup items for spare parts because they're not in constant use. So anything that you purchase for these types of awards have to be in constant use. We also require that you provide a statement based on the cap grants application as to when these items will be used. What we call hours of operation and frequency of use, which is, you have to provide a statement acknowledging that the proposed equipment or vehicle purchase will be used on such and such hours and such days, with the minimum number of days per year based on what you enter in the application. That also could change from the time that you apply for capital funding versus the time we begin the process, which we start with the initial phase of this is what we call the scope and pre-certificate to proceed process. If anything changes, we need to know in writing. Purchases of items that have embedded software or separate software license for use on equipment have terms and conditions that must be reviewed to determine their transferability to the city. This is what happens is if the city were to repossess an item with software in it based on the terms and conditions of your funding agreement, if there's an event of default and the city needs to repossess the item, We need to know that the terms and the conditions allow for the transfer of the license to the city if the city wants to give the item to another organization that the transaction runs smoothly. If your organization is purchasing equipment that's minimally attached, you must obtain non-fixture agreements or personality agreements from your landlord and or lender, depending on whether your landlord has or whether you're leasing or owning a building and whether the building has a mortgage on it. You have to get personality or not fixtures agreements acknowledging that any minimally attached items are not fixtures and not part of the real property. The agreement will also include a list of affected items. For minimally attached items, another thing to consider is that any item that's connected to a water or gas are deemed fixtures and are not eligible. If it's an item that you just plug a socket, plug into a wall socket, that's fine. That's not minimally attached. That's not deemed minimally attached. But anything connected to water or gas, let's say washer and dryer or a stove, those items will not be eligible. And also, there's if you apply for, let's say, if you're applying for $100,000 worth of funding, and the total amount of purchases, let's say, comes out to 120,000, we can only reimburse you for up to the award amount. Even if all items are eligible, we can only reimburse you up to the amount of your award. And also, in the opposite direction, if you're applying for $100,000 worth of funding and the total amount of your purchases, let's say, comes to 95,000, we can only reimburse you for up to $95,000. So it's always going to be the lesser between the eligible costs or the award allocation amount. So when we receive notice of the allocation of the funding, we will notify your organization to provide specific documentation for the first phase, which is scope and free CP review, which I'll show you what the checklist for that looks like. It's a series of items, some of which are required for all awards, and then also the checklist is split up to show you items that are required depending on the type of award that you have. And so I'm going to go to the next slide, and for each award type, there are specific requirements. This is just some basic bullet points. Some of this that we do have to sometimes go into further detail. If I do that, then this meeting will take a lot longer than that. But we do have information, more in-depth information about each of these awards types, and also each of the phases. If you're purchasing vehicles, as mentioned before, must have full quotes to vet out any potential ineligible items. And if you're purchasing a passenger vehicle, the minimum seating capacity is at least 10, and that includes the driver. If a quotation doesn't clearly identify the passenger count, we require a seating diagram. So we need to verify that any passenger vehicles can seat a minimum of 10 individuals. Also another note is that vehicles must be parked in secure sites. Parking a vehicle on a sidewalk is not allowed, as that is prone to theft. So it should be parked in a lot or anywhere that's secure, fencing, cameras, anything that makes it secure, even that makes it less likely for it to be stolen. So it's a matter of security for that. If you're purchasing a vehicle with equipment inside of it, all equipment must be mounted to the vehicle for it to be eligible. For example, we've done awards for mobile medical units. So the unit itself is outfitted with various equipment. All such equipment must be mounted inside the vehicle for it to be considered eligible. For if you're purchasing an equipment award, all equipment awards must be a system. So if the equipment award consists of multiple components, all components must be connected together, whether via physical or wireless connection, to form a functional unit. Let's say, for example, if you're purchasing an IT award, all IT devices, if it's desktops, printers, routers, monitors, like let's say, all components must be connected to form a system. And there's a specific diagram we have for that, an equipment systems diagram, which your organization will provide. And that's something that's also included with your CAP grant submission. So you have to provide a diagram that clearly illustrates how every component in a system connects to one another. So you cannot have any components that function completely independent from the system. So any such items will be flagged as ineligible. If you're purchasing equipment for multiple systems, each system must have $50,000 worth of eligible equipment. So let's say, for example, we've had hospital awards which they acquire multiple units. So each unit has to be at least $50,000 for it to be eligible. So let's say even if the overall award amount is more than 50,000, but one of the items, let's say, is 45, that $45,000 unit will not be eligible for reimbursement. Going back to medical devices, we need to flag any potential ineligible features, and we need to see full specs. We prefer that if possible that the specs are itemized, because some providers of medical devices like GE, for example, they'll provide a quotation and list each feature, and each feature will have a specific line item cost. Typical ineligible features that we flag for medical units consist of training and spare parts, and sometimes also items that are not connected to the system, like standalone items. So standalone items, backup, spare parts, and training are the most common items that are flagged for reimbursement for medical devices. Now, for initial outfitting awards, when you're occupying a new space, the new space has to be newly renovated or constructed. So if it's a space for like a renewed lease agreement, that's not eligible. Leases should have at least, the reason why I'm putting in 6 years from the date that the budget packet is submitted is because it is a timely process from the date that we submit the initial budget package to OMB to the date that you receive reimbursement. So you want to account for that time plus the additional 5 years in which you have to use all equipment as part of the city purpose covenant of the funding agreement, which requires you to use all equipment 5 years after receiving reimbursement. So that's the reason why I'm referencing 6, just to account for the time that's going to take for your organization to receive reimbursement. If you're outfitting a new space, all items must have a minimum unit cost of $165. There actually is one exception to this rule, and that is if the item is a component for a larger piece of equipment, and that component cannot function on its own, then that item would be eligible. So when you're filling out the budget, and we have templates for all that, and for that, you need to identify what item the component or what system the component is connected to. Also, initial outfitting awards have strict timelines for purchases. Now, purchases is when the orders are placed, not necessarily when the items are delivered. So if you order, you cannot place any orders more than 6 months after your move-in date. Move-in date is when the facility is first occupied for business use. From that date, you cannot place any orders for that site more than 6 months after that date. That's a hard rule. If you're placing orders prior to move-in, there is a 6-month limit to that, but there is some leeway with that. I know if, let's say, for example, there's always a possibility that a site could be delayed, even if you've already placed orders. So we ask that if orders end up being placed more than 6 months prior to move-in, we're going to need a justification for that. We obviously don't want to order something too far out. Another thing that we recommend for initial outfitting awards is that we recommend that you place all orders before you submit the documentation. The reason why is there's always a possibility for the list of items to change. it just makes it easier for us not to have to review a budget multiple times over, considering that you do have initial outfitting awards that can consist of hundreds of items, and that we have to review all the quotations from scratch each time. So once you have the final purchases made, and we always remind organizations to let us know if you have any questions about the eligibility of these items, so we could tell you, yes, this is something that's eligible, this is not. So that way you have more confidence in terms of the orders that you're going to place for these items. So once you have the final purchase or final orders ready, then you can submit. You can do it prior. It's just a lot easier when the orders are finalized. For other types of awards, we can go with quotations that you have. I know there's always a possibility that what might be purchased will differ than what was originally quoted. Same thing, any changes, we need to know. We need to know in writing to make sure, and we need to review the changed item just to make sure that it is eligible, because sometimes it may not be eligible, or it's eligible, but we have to kind of flag out or vet out an eligible cost. So for the budget and pre-CP stages, a plethora of items that are required that we review, and then we forward the items to one of our attorneys on staff, who will then review the items themselves and prepare a draft of the funding and security agreement, which outlines the terms and conditions to be reimbursed for the equipment and use of the equipment. And all the drafts and the budget and pre-CP package is forwarded to OMB for review. They might have comments, and once everything's approved from that stage, we then move on to the certificate to proceed phase and also registration. These two phases kind of go hand in hand. DDC will prepare a certificate to proceed request that goes to OMB, and as mentioned, for the EDC presentation of the CP is kind of like an official proclamation acknowledging that the city authorizes allocation of funds from the capital budget towards your purchases. For registration, you will receive a final copy of the funding and security agreement, which will be signed, and just review the terms and conditions carefully so you understand what's expected once what's expected for you to receive reimbursement, and once you receive reimbursement. It's not just once you get the reimbursed, you do have to hold on to the equipment. You have to send OMB a list of inventory to be sure that you're in continued compliance with the terms of the funding agreement. You have to have insurance. You have to have active insurance policies, liability, disability, workers' compensation. And when the time comes for reimbursement, you also have to have property insurance, vehicle insurance. If your award is at least $100,000, you have to provide Division of Labor Services compliance certification. There's forms that you'll download which will provide for you as to what documentation you have to provide. It's like a HR-related documentation that goes to the Department of Small Business Services. You have to have a passport account registered, and prior to registration, you might have outstanding violations, environmental control board violations or tax liens that have to be cleared before a funding agreement is registered by the controller's office. Once a funding agreement is registered, we will notify you to provide a list of reimbursement items. Some of the reimbursement items required are invoices, proof that all invoices are paid in full. We need to see canceled checks, EFT transactions. Credit card payments are tricky because not only do you have to show that the credit card transaction, you also have to provide proof that any outstanding card balances were paid in full. All purchases must be bid out to at least 3 vendors, and try to go with the lowest vendor if possible. There is a procurement affirmation form that is filled out as part of the reimbursement process that you'll enter. You'll list all the bidding information that you received. There are some exceptions in terms of sourcing out to 3 vendors for bids and going to lowest bidder. For example, hospitals might purchase equipment only from a specific vendor for compatibility purposes or familiarity. So there's always exceptions, but the general rule is to bid out to at least 3 vendors and to go with the lowest vendor. Prior to the city reimbursing your organization for any equipment purchases or vehicles, all liens must be placed on the equipment, but if there are competing liens, they must be cleared out. So your attorneys will work on that. So you have to have attorneys on staff to review to see if there are any competing liens. You'll also have to do a judgment and tax lien search, which they also do a UCC search for that as well, to make sure that there are no outstanding judgments, liens, violations as per the search results. If there are, you have to provide evidence that they were cleared or that they were paid or satisfied. If you have any competing liens through UCC filings from the New York State Department of State, you have to submit UCC amendments that will carve out or exclude any city-funded equipment. Let's say, for example, if your organization has a lien with a bank, and the terms of the lien is broad, that it kind of covers all equipment, then that's a scenario where you'll have to submit a UCC amendment to carve out our city-funded equipment, and then that allows us, the city, to place our lien on the equipment. So once a lien is filed through the New York State Department of State, it is for a period of 5 years, which automatically lapses. If you're purchasing a vehicle, vehicle liens are done through the Department of Motor Vehicles, a certificate of title, and that lien certificate, that title certificate, has to show DDC as the sole lien holder. There cannot be any other lien holders on there. The term of the lien for that is indefinite. So once you receive reimbursement and 5 years has passed, then you have to put in a request with DDC to have the lien removed. So that's something that does not automatically happen. As mentioned before, you need insurance coverage for all equipment or vehicles. Also, certification has to be current. And also make sure that when you're providing any documentation, you have to do a fine balance between accuracy and quickness, because a lot of documentation that is required have expiration dates, especially with the vehicle awards. You have certificates of insurance policies that expire, registrations, DMV registrations that expires. You don't want to submit a judgment, a tax lien search that's from a long time ago. So you want to have a lien search that's as close to when all the other reimbursement items are submitted in an accurate manner. And as always, all equipment must be in use for at least 5 years after reimbursement. And then just going through some notes here. If you need to purchase equipment prior to registration, you can. We don't recommend it because it is at your own risk, but we cannot tell you no. The only exception, of course, is what I mentioned earlier, that you cannot buy any item prior to the fiscal year of your award. When you submit reimbursement documentation, only one reimbursement is allowed per award. We cannot divvy up a funding agreement across multiple reimbursements. It's not allowed. Once a funding agreement is registered, you do have a 1-year limit to provide reimbursement items. That is noted on the funding agreement. If you're not sure of something, always ask us. The information, it's a lot to take in. Sometimes it's not always straightforward. There can be exceptions here and there. If you're not sure of something, always ask, because if you don't, there's always a possibility you might do something and it's not going to be correct. If we do have comments, whether through the DDC review or the OMB review, please respond as quickly as you can, because it can affect the eligibility of an item, especially if it's been purchased already, because the useful life of an item is from when you buy it till you receive to 5 years after you receive reimbursement. If you purchase the item prior to reimbursement, you're going to end up having to hold on to that item longer than expected if there are delays in providing the required documentation for each phase of the award process. And here is a website where you could download forms or checklists for each stage of the award process. So this is our budget and pre-CP checklist. We have it broken up into two parts here. Part A is required for all awards, doesn't matter what type it is. And Part B applies for specific awards. And we will always let you know which ones, if any, apply. And these checklists have links to the website that you're just looking at here. And we also include bullet points next to each item to give you kind of more insight as to what's expected. And also for some of these items here, these are the items for the budget and pre-CP checklist. We have the templates you can download. And also for some items, you can also view a note spreadsheet. So let's say, for example, if I wanted to open up the budget template, here, for example, the budget template, we will give you all the information what you need to provide in these fields and the information here that you have to enter for each item. We also include a notes tab for some of these items to provide you additional guidance on how to complete them. So always take advantage of all the information that we have. We also have presentation videos on each stage of the process. And we're actually in the, I just recently made more up-to-date videos on these, which are shorter and also more informative. So these videos cover each phase in a great level of detail. This is the list checklist for registration. There's actually two parts to this. The regular registration items like your funding agreement, compliance report, and also insurance certificates. And we also have another checklist for reimbursement. That we have two different types for vehicles awards and also purchase of equipment because the required documentations differ slightly. So we have separate checklists for that. And for most items, we do have templates. For some items, we don't have a template because some of these items is something you have to provide on your own. We don't have there's no such, we can't do a template for that. So let's say, for example, for reimbursement, if you have to provide invoices, proofs of payment, there's no template for that, of course. So we do provide guidance on every step of the process, templates, anything, any concerns or anything you're not sure of, always ask. It'll greatly speed up the process so that you can get an award registered, your funding agreement registered, and reimbursement issued. All right. And we also have a group email address here if you have any concerns. Once you receive a capital award, though, you will be assigned a specific project manager, and then any inquiries will be directed to that individual directly, and also myself. So you can use this email early on if you have any questions, and then afterwards you'll contact your assigned project manager and or attorney for the later stages. All right.
Thank you so much, Joshua. We'd like to welcome Darren from DCLA, who's going to just quickly run us through some of the eligibility requirements for DCLA.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much, Astrid. My name is Darren Brannon. I'm a project manager here at the Department of Cultural Affairs in the Capital Unit. So first off, I want to say a lot of the information can be found on the one-sheeter that Astrid emailed out to all participants. You can also find a lot of information on our website. If you don't have that bookmarked, you can search for NYC DCLA, and we should be the first option that comes up. I want to start off by referencing back to something Dave said earlier. DCLA does have different forms to upload to CAP grants. You will find those on our website. Hopefully those will be live before the 22nd of December. Don't hold me to that, but that's our goal. When applying to DCLA for cultural capital, your organization must be a member of the Cultural Institutions Group or must have received a CDF panel recommendation within one of the past 3 fiscal years. Fiscal year for the city is July 1st through June 30th, so we're looking at fiscal years 24, 23, or 22. The DCLA Capital Unit will send out notifications and invites to our seminars to all organizations that meet one of these criteria. If there are any CIGs on this info session, you should ensure your capital project manager has the appropriate contact information. And I also want to encourage all CDF recipients to update their contact information in their DCLA online account. If you don't know if your organization has a CDF panel recommendation, please reach out to your program officer at DCLA. It's important to note that DCLA represents mayoral funding for cultural capital projects, and we're an active funding partner with the Borough President and City Council. If your request includes funding from DCLA, then the City Council deadline applies to your request if it doesn't include BP funding. So you can kind of look at those deadlines as City Council/DCLA. A majority of DCLA projects are city managed, which means that DDC or EDC will actually manage the construction project, or DCLA proper will be purchasing the equipment. And so you will most likely not be reimbursed for any expenses you incur. Again, I want to reiterate, as those who have previously spoken said, do not make any purchases before we have a chance to talk to you. You do so at your own risk. There are many other differences between the way DCLA manages the capital projects and what you've heard from EDC and DDC. One important thing I want to note right now is that DCLA does not manage initial outfitting for equipment projects, so please do not submit those as part of a request. DCLA will review your project for eligibility and will reach out to you with any questions. On the non-cultural side, OMB does the review, and the city council members or the BPs will reach out to you. If you're cultural, we will do that here internally at DCLA. So we encourage eligible organizations to reach out to DCLA prior to submitting a funding request and discuss your project with us. If you have an active project, please email your project manager and discuss your FY25 requests. If you're submitting a request for new funding, you can email capitalrequest@culture.nyc.gov. You can find that email address on our website or on the one-sheeter that Astrid handed out. Again, that's capitalrequest@culture.nyc.gov. On our website, you can also find information regarding capital funding, as well as information regarding other DCLA capital or funding opportunities and programs. All right, Astrid, that's it for me. Thank you so much.
Awesome, thank you. And I will be sure to recirculate that one sheet that was sent as part of the original invitation. So you guys have all the information. And lastly, we have SECF from HPD, who will be giving us our final presentation before we go into our Q&A portion.
Okay, hi everyone. So my name is Azizia Hiwat, and I'm the Assistant Commissioner for Capital Planning here at HPD. So I'm going to see if I can present in Teams. It will allow me to. And hopefully this works. Great. Okay. You see it clearly? We should be good.
Yep, all good.
Awesome. Okay. So just to start off, one of the things that I know most may need in terms of like applying for Reso A is that you guys need to have, prior city contracts or city funding. That's not a requirement for housing. So if you look through some of the guidance that's provided by the city, most of it does not apply to housing projects. So you don't need that prior city funding. That's one. And two, in terms of the capital eligibility cost threshold, the $50,000, that is assessed on a per building basis. It is not based on your trade breakdown, which is usually what is required for other agencies. So housing projects, you must meet that $50,000 threshold, and improvements with that minimal useful life of 5 years. That goes for all city capitals. So that's not just for discretionary funding, but also for any of the subsidy that the agency provides through one of our housing loan programs. So this like I said, it is assessed on a per building basis. The only time that you will not have that assessed on a per building basis is if you are constructing some form of non-residential space in conjunction with the housing. For that non-residential space, that will require a detailed cost breakdown for the scope, and that will also be looked at by trade. So for our projects, capital eligible costs are usually eligible costs are hard costs. So that's anything that is related and necessary for construction of the building. Most soft costs in our deal are not eligible. And I'll get into why that is a little later. So for rehabilitation projects, that's usually major systems. So oftentimes for rehab, we'll see boilers, we'll see your HVAC, a lot of roof, a lot of facade work, especially within compliance with local law 11. You'll sometimes have some in-unit rehabilitation or in-unit rehab work that's being done, oftentimes in conjunction with the major system upgrades that are happening. So those are typical items that you'll see that are eligible for funding, as well as green improvements. So there's solar is one of the biggest things. Also, there are some smaller conservation, like energy efficiency and water conservation measures that are taken. Some of those smaller ones are not eligible, but we do have a way of financing that through one of our funding partners, which you may know or may not, is New York City's Housing Development Corporation, or HDC. One thing that is not eligible for capital funding from HPD is transitional housing. So I should be clear in saying, instead of saying capitally eligible, I should talk about whether it is eligible under our loan authorities. So with HPD, we do not only have to comply with Directive 10, which dictates how we can use capital funding, but we also have to be mindful of our loan authorities, because HPD does not provide grants very seldom, and it's only in very special cases that we use grants. Everything that we provide is through a loan. So if you are rehabilitating transitional housing, if you're transitioning into permanent housing, all of those units must have a lease. Those rents are subject to rent stabilization, and the units must be registered with DHCR at the time of closing. So let's say that you have a small family shelter that you are now wanting to convert into permanent housing. These are some of the steps you may want to consider in that process that will have to take place before you can actually close on financing with HPD. Capital ineligible items must be covered by an alternative source, and that is a non-city source. So that may be if you are a private building owner doing rehab, that may be your, building reserves. You may be taking out private debt. You may have a grant of some sort. Either way, there are costs that are included in our deals that are not typical of a city finance project, that are not eligible for capital funding. So you will need some other source of funding to do that. So various ones are financing fees, construction loan interest. Financing fees may be like origination costs if you are seeking private debt. Legal costs we cannot cover, and any HPD fees, or actually like any other city fees, permit fees, those are usually not eligible under our projects for capital. Another thing to consider is acquisition. So acquisition in itself is an eligible cost. The issue is timing. So if you have already acquired the property, HPD cannot finance that acquisition cost. So you've mentioned, or I should say other presenters have mentioned already, that things are done on a reimbursement basis. HPD does not work on a reimbursement basis. Do not buy anything. Do not start any work. Do not do anything before you have met with us. And that is because, like I mentioned before, we have to consider not only the capital eligible costs, but also is something allowable under our loan authorities. So before you do anything, we want to make sure that this is something that we can actually provide financing for. We will not do that if you've already done the work, you've already found a source for it. That means that that part of the project was already funded, so you do not need our funding, right? So we like to emphasize, do not do anything, do not buy anything, don't start any work prior to consulting with the agency. You need to have approval from OMB before anything can be financed. Something else, in addition to acquisition, I would like to say refinancing of debt. Sometimes you may have existing debt on your property, and you may be looking for better terms. We also do not provide funding for your refinancing. you will have to go through private debt, finding another bank, or some other source. In addition to that, city purpose covenants, or as you've heard, the restricted declarations, those are required if the property is already existing, if this has already been previously financed by HPD with existing regulatory agreements. So to go into this just a little bit further, because this comes up every so often, if you are developing a non-residential space, especially in a new construction project, that space will usually already have a regulatory agreement that's going to be placed on it, right? So if you're doing new construction, when we're closing on the financing, there's usually some sort of clause that's going to restrict the use of that space for some determined time frame, right? Whether it's only for the probable use, or I should say the useful life period, or some other time period that is determined by HPD and OMB together. If you're outfitting a space that is already in one of our housing structures, if we have already closed on financing, or if the space, like if the building has already been constructed and you want to bring in new funds in order to outfit that space, that can be extremely difficult because that new funding will need to have, as you've heard before, the first lien position. And that's extremely difficult because if our documents have already been executed, right? Our external funding partners, which are usually our deals, are funded with a private bank or in conjunction with HDC and their bonds. Those will have first lien position and they do not concede to RESOA funding. So just something to keep in mind when you are considering coming back to the city for funding to outfit spaces, or I should say outfit non-residential spaces that are in an HPD financed project. General process considerations. So RESOA funding is not a grant, it is a loan. So like I've mentioned earlier, everything is done through one of our housing loan programs, and I think Ashwood also mentioned this. So our loan terms on these loans are determined by our Office of Development in communication with the project sponsors, right? So something to consider when you are about to apply for RESOA, you should reach out to the agency first. So if you have been working with us, this is usually the case definitely on new construction deals, and sometimes the case on some of our larger preservation deals. If you have been working with the agency already, you should reach out to us first before you apply for RESOA. If you are a project that has already closed on financing and you need additional financing for whatever the reason may be, you should reach out to the agency. You should reach out to whoever your project manager is before applying, because they need to understand if the funds that you are requesting are necessary, and if there's possibly some other way that they can work through your needs prior to requesting additional funds from the agency. So always reach out to us first before you apply for RESOA or for any kind of funding. So the funding is provided in conjunction with one of our loan programs, like we said. So if your RESOA is going to be a piece of it, there's also the possibility that if you didn't have enough RESOA, that you may be able to receive additional city funding through the agency through one of our development programs. So something else to think about is that we do not let you guys know if you have received funding or not. So if you are not sure whether or not you were awarded the funds, you should reach out to your elected official, reach out to their office to find out whether or not those funds were awarded. So in terms of the timing, upon your RESOA award approval, capital funding is not immediately available to the sponsors, right? So you are still subject to our development process. So even though you may have been provided an award and that award will become technically available in the budget for use on July 1st, you still need to go through the due diligence of one of our development programs, right? So that includes, you're going to apply for one of our financing programs. At the end of the slide, we have, I've kind of listed where you can find that on our website to have information regarding all of the programs that are available and what it means to work with the agency for funds. So you are going to apply for one of our HPD finance programs with the Office of Development. That can be either preservation, new construction, if you're doing special needs, or some kind of home ownership project. You can find all of those programs listed on the website to see which one fits the type of project that you want to construct, right? So that proposed scope of work has to be identified, like I said, with one of these programs. And when you are applying and you're submitting your application, please make sure to include a scope of work, especially if it is a rehabilitation project, because you may have items that are in there that may not be eligible, and that will determine whether or not you can actually move forward with your project at all. So we don't want you as the applicant to be to find out that your application was rejected and you don't understand why. We want you guys to be aware as soon as possible. We understand that sometimes a building may have multiple needs at one time, and you had to kind of pick and choose. So based on what is eligible in the scope, you may be able to kind of pivot to like submit something different in your application. So these are things that we can work with you on. So after you have applied, now again, this is all after you have been awarded your RESOA funds, right? So after you've applied to one of our development projects, upon submission, HPD staff will review your application and you'll be contacted by somebody on the development staff. They'll assign a project manager from one of the programs. And then after that, you'll start your review process with them. This is kind of what we will refer to as your pre-development in a sense, right? So some of the things that they'll have to do in terms of due diligence is they'll be looking at your financials. They'll be trying to ensure that you've received all the documents necessary to move forward with a closing. If you have a scope, if you need an IP&A, if you need legal, any kind of technical assistance, they'll be working with you through that process. That process, before you can even start that process, there may be a wait. So all of this depends on project readiness. It depends on the complexity of your deal, and this depends on staff capacity. It's not a surprise, or it is not a secret that our agency, as our city as a whole, has been suffering in terms of staff capacity, right? We've lost a lot of staff. So it may take a while before somebody is able to reach out to you. It may take a while before we can even move a project through the development stages. So just something to keep in mind, that just because the funds have been put into our budget is not going to be instantaneous in terms of you being able to close on your financing. So yes, project readiness, staff capacity, just want to make sure that we stress that. So let's say that now you've gone through all of that, your due diligence is done, your development staff has spoken with you, and we're ready to put in your CP. That is when you're going to be able to access your funding. The CP process, or the certificate to proceed, is just the authorization by the city saying that we are committing to this funding for this project. That process alone takes about at least 3 months. So whatever time it took to actually get your project from application to being able to start the CP process, you have to think about the additional time that it takes in order to actually review your CP and get approval so that your funding can come through, and that we can actually write a check for you guys so that you can close on a deal. So those are some of the things I want you guys to think about. When you are applying, I want to say that your naming conventions are very helpful. If you have been working with the agency and you've been referring to your project under a certain name, if it has been Main Street 123 and that's what you have been discussing with the agency prior, when you submit your application at CAP grants, it would be really helpful if you use that same name so that it's easy for us to identify. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes addresses can change, sponsors can change, like if you're using a different legal name of some sort. So if we have been working with you under some other nomenclature, it would be helpful if you continue to use that so that we can easily identify it and we don't have an issue where we're saying, well, we've never heard of this organization, we've never heard of this project. It makes things a little bit simpler for us to see and say, okay, we understand that this is a project we're working with and that they need the funding for X, Y, and Z reasons. So it just helps us along in our review process. Last but not least, Everything is subject to OMB Council review, and they are the interpreters of Directive 10. So even if you have submitted something in your application, right, in your resume application, and we've reviewed it and we've said, oh, okay, no, these are all things that are typically eligible. Once we get to your CP process, if something comes up and they realize, hey, OMB Council and Bond Council are saying, this is something that we actually can't loan for. This is something that we have found is not capitally eligible. Those things happen, which is why we have non-city sources that need to come in sometimes to cover these mishaps. So something that's to keep in mind as well is that these things will come up every so often, that you may find that something's not eligible when you may have been operating under the assumption that it is. Things can change. We are currently going through some legal changes as well. We've had some legal changes at the state level in terms of legislature that is going to start dictating some of the changes that will happen in terms of how we develop our projects. So we ask that you guys reach out to us if you have any questions, and we're here to help. So that's it for me. Hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you so much. And I know we've gone a little bit over time, but our partners here have accepted to hang on for a little longer in case there are any questions. But again, if there are any questions that remain unanswered, I am going to leave the meeting open a little longer so you can drop questions into the chat and we'll send a follow-up FAQ afterwards. So here we go. Let's see. We have a question from David Jones.
Yes. Hi, Astra. How are you? This is David Jones of the New York City Computer Lab Initiative. Hope all is well. The question that I have, if it's a citywide initiative, but let's just take a borough-wide initiative. If so, when asking for address, and there are like 90 different addresses, what exactly would we put in that part of the application?
I can take this question, Astrid. I think 2 points I want to make in response to this. You can add multiple addresses in your application. When I showed sort of how to add application or add addresses on the Cap Grants website, you can just add additional locations there. That's fine. I do want to point out that without knowing any of the details of your project, please keep in mind that each individual equipment piece or system that is a self-contained capital asset must reach that $50,000 threshold. So if you're talking about buying like 1 or 2 computers for site, 1 or 2 computers for site 2, it's probably not going to meet the threshold requirement. So just sort of keep that in mind as you go. I think at the very worst, if you need to provide some sort of supplemental list of project locations or something, there'll be a way for you to put that in. Try your best when you're filling out the application, but we'll figure out how to get the information.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate it.
You got it.
And we have a question. Thank you, Dave. From Bibi Ishak. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you, Astrid. I actually have 2 questions. First, the first question is actually for you, Astrid. If we are getting City Council capital funding for 25, fiscal year 25, does that affect funding from the borough president at all? I mean, is it worth it to apply now for funding from the borough president, knowing that we're already gotten funding for fiscal year 25 already from City Council?
No, that's perfectly fine. You can still apply for funding from our office. We do co-fund some projects. You can still submit an application to us as well.
Is the likelihood of getting funding, I mean, because it's a lengthy application, as many people know and have kind of said, and I just kind of wonder, is there a less likelihood of getting funding from both sources?
No, there isn't. The BP, obviously, it's up to his discretion which groups he funds, but we don't not fund groups just because we know they're getting funding from other sources. If it's a project that is of interest to him, then we'll do our best to support.
Okay. And my second question is actually to Mason, if he's still on the call. Is Mason still on the call?
Yes,
Oh,
I am.
okay, great. So, with discretionary funding, you can take a loan on your funding amount for that fiscal year. Is that a possibility for capital grant funding, or do you have to make sure that it's paid up, like it's basically just straight reimbursement?
So I may not fully understand the question, but essentially, some groups do have like bridge loans to help them like basically float their expenditures until they can get reimbursed. That some groups have loans or other outside financing deals or structures in order to like meet the match requirement. Because again, we're never on EDC funding agreements that are city funded. We never are paying like 100% of the cost, and that's part of the full funding vet. We're just going to make sure that all those funding sources, be they grants or equity or other funding sources, that like those agreements are executed, those donations are received, the loans are in place, etc. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Actually, it does answer my question. And is it possible to get your information so that we can open some communication with us and you?
Oh, sure. You can just email funding agreement at edc.nyc, and the funding and agreement are capitalized. I'll just drop it in the chat. But what I would say is if it's like an application related question, I mean, you that really we can't necessarily assist with that. But if it's just general process questions, we can answer.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mason. And next we have Jenny.
Hi, this is Jenny. I'm with the New York Blood Center. So I wanted to ask a question about vendors and getting, 3 quotes, et cetera. So a lot of the products that we use, the testing equipment, the vans, et cetera, all come from a specific vendor because of our very specific needs. And we purchase from them. We have purchase agreements with them. Do we need to reach out to alternative vendors to fulfill this minimum 3 vendor type process?
Not necessarily. The general rule is yes, you have to, but there could be exceptions to it. And usually, let's say, for example, if a specific vendor provides equipment to satisfy the organization's needs, then that would be allowable. So, for example, we have like when the organizations do a reimbursement, we have them fill out a form called a procurement affirmation, which we ask the organization, did you obtain bids from 3 vendors? And it's a yes or no question. If you answer yes, you'll provide the bidding information. If you answer no, you'll have to provide a written explanation as to why. And if you so you will just have to provide a written justification.
I see. Thank you. And my second question is there a guideline in terms of how much we can ask for? Is there, obviously, with when the focus was on health, you divided it among 3 grants with the hospital. But in general, when there is no focus and it's open call, open season for everybody, what is the general guideline here? Because we've got a lot of projects going on, I feel, that would probably qualify, but I don't want to overstep.
So sorry, there's a lot of noise going on outside. But really, I mean, like, we can't really tell an organization how much to apply for. I think that if you have a number of projects on the pipeline, I would certainly prioritize the ones that obviously, are more feasible, are more important to you guys. But there really isn't like a general guideline of like, us giving any groups like a cap as to how much they can request from our office. And it's possible also that, if it's a project that is on a much bigger, has a much higher cost, that we may fund it like over the course of future years versus awarding everything in one year.
Is there a place where I would be able to see the groups that were funded and the amounts that were funded from last year?
Yes, yes, that is public information. I'm happy to share that with you separately.
Thank you.
And I think that's all we have in terms of everyone that's here live. We do have some, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Since no one else is asking more questions, I will ask another question. This is the first time I've done this. So basically, I think there was another person who asked a question about, do the other council people and the other funders, can they see all the funding requests that we're making from different boroughs, et cetera, and the council if you did not tag them?
So I can answer this. Elected officials and their staff will only see the applications that you have submitted to their office. That's how the system works. We, as the OMB reviewers and others who may be looking at things, have the opportunity to see everything that's submitted. So we are looking at those. If people ask us questions, we would be able to tell them about applications, but they would not see those themselves. Anybody who has access to an application, meaning if you submit an application to the Brooklyn Borough President, Astrid and her team can see everyone that you requested funding from for that project, and you'll have to identify those, right? So you have to say, we wanted, if it's a $50,000 project, we wanted 25K from the BP, we wanted 25K from the council, and then here are the council members we identified. Anyone who sees that will see which elected officials you requested those funds from.
And is this an all or nothing type of a deal? So if we say request 25,000 from the Brooklyn Borough, and then 25,000 from the council to do total 50,000, and then would the council go, oh well, we'll only do 15,000, and then there's like a gap basically of $10,000.
So the main thing to keep in mind is the minimum funding amount for any project is those categories.
I was arbitrarily making up numbers.
No. If a project is not fully, it doesn't get enough money to meet the threshold, the city can't really make that project happen at all. That said, between the elected officials, how they decide how much to fund and which projects to fund is really, it's their discretion. They do discuss this stuff together, not to speak for you, Astrid, but, and help decide if it's a project they care about, how to make that work. But ultimately, if, the BP doesn't fund the full thing and it's under the threshold and the council decides not to fund, it won't be a viable project. So, it's good to always discuss with your elected officials to get a sense of what they're interested in funding, and whether that support is available.
Thank you.
Of course.
I think we may have one more. Oh, okay. So I think that pretty much wraps us up here. Thank you again all for sticking here after the set time. So again, I'll be sending out FAQs and all the information that was presented today. A recording will be a link to this recording will be placed on our website, and we'll be sure to send around the application link once everything is set up and becomes available on our website. So on behalf of the Borough President, I'd like to thank you all for attending and for your continued work and advocacy on behalf of our Brooklynites. Also, thank you to our partnering agencies for so graciously accepting our invitation to participate in the session, and to the team at our office for their support in putting this together. We look forward to working with all of you, and as the BP would say, continue spreading love. It's the Brooklyn way. Happy holidays to all of you.
Thanks, Astrid.
Thanks,
everybody.
Astrid.
Same to you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.